here again, party people. It is time for the mid-year freakout book tag. What is the mid-year freakout book tag, you may ask? Great question. It's essentially a check-in where we see what books we've read, what books we've liked, what books we haven't read yet, and what books are coming out that we want to read. It's basically just a halfway touch base. Also, hi, I'm Michaela. This is Meekela Reads. I live here. I don't know how many years I've done this for at this point. It's been a few, but here we are again, back to tell you about some of the books that I have read this year. I was preparing this video, and honestly, I haven't read a lot of great books this year, and I'm really upset about it. Just to kick off, my goal for the rest of this year is to actually read some good books. That's my plan. But let's jump into the video. Let's talk about the books that I have read. It's been a while since I've done a book tag. I have to remember how to do this. The first question is the best book you have read so far this year. For this one, I wanted to put a book, but in the interest of not crossing over and having the same book for multiple questions, like we've got different books for different questions here, I've had to pick a different book than what I wanted to put as my favorite book for the year so far. So, A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini is technically going to be the best book I've read so far this year, for the reason that his writing is phenomenal and the story for this one was so engrossing. It is my favorite Hosseini that I have read so far. I listened to this one on audiobook and it was a lovely experience. It was a harrowing and traumatic book, but a lovely reading experience doing it that way because it was so much easier to ingest. This is a historical fiction set in Afghanistan. It spans a few different decades and it follows two women primarily as they navigate several historic events that happen and also some pretty tough relationships and conflicts. I'm saying that it's the best book I've read so far this year because of the fact that it is written so well. The story was compelling. I was moved to tears. That's a later question, but we'll get there. And it definitely stood out as just a good book. A well-constructed, well-rounded book. I had no questions. I was satisfied with the ending. That is the reason that this is the best book I've read so far this year. Next is the best sequel you have read this year. For this one, I'm kind of breaking the rule I already just set myself. The best sequel I have read this year is actually Crush by Tracy Wolff, and this is the second book sequel to the Crave series. I have not been hit by a paranormal young adult romance book like I was hit by this book in a long time. It really took me back to those nostalgia feelings from reading when I was a kid. It just really took me back to yesteryear. I've put this as the best sequel because the shift from book one to book two was actually wild. Like, the story in book one and the romance in book one, it was fine. I thought it was interesting to listen to. I had nothing else to listen to, but the step up from book one to book two in terms of the relationships and the stakes and the themes and the messages was just, it was very different. And it is probably one of the only books that I've read recently that I can comfortably say the book two was way better than book one. Unfortunately, the series does peak at book two, but again, we'll get there a little bit later in the video. Question 3 is a new release that you haven't read yet. There's a few. I'm just really bad at keeping up with new releases, okay? Rapid Fire, The Fourth Wing, Love Theoretically, that new TJ Klune book, In the Lives of Puppets. Oh, and Happy Place by Emily Henry. I have them. I have the best intentions of getting to them, but then I just either fall into a slump like I have this year, or I just read other things. The Fourth Wing is a fantasy romance, I think, set at a school where people learn to ride dragons. The hype is real for this one, but I have low expectations because I've been burned before. In the Lives of Puppets is TJ Klune's newest book. It's a sci-fi fantasy, I believe, following humans and robots. But I have heard, and I don't know where I heard it, I just heard it, that it is written and reads like a cozy fantasy. So that is what has piqued my interest for this one. Again, cozy fantasy. It is where my heart is sitting at the moment. Happy Place by Emily Henry is a friends to lovers or a second chance romance. Second chance romance, I think that's what it is. This broke the internet when it came out and I haven't read it yet, but I will. And Love Theoretically, no one told me that this was out. No one told me, I just found it when I was at the shops the other day. Love Theoretically, it is Ali Hazelwood's third full-length novel. Ali Hazelwood is an author for me, and for that reason I don't actually know what the content of this book is, but knowing her, it is some form of women in STEM romance with a hate to love and a tall, dark, and brooding love interest. On that note, question 4 is your most anticipated release for the rest of this year. And because I'm really bad with knowing what's coming out and what's actually around, the only book that I kind of know that's coming out is Check and Mate, also by Ali Hazelwood. Again, she's an auto by author for me. But my understanding is that this one is actually her young adult contemporary debut. Again, I think it still follows the same kind of thing, except instead of STEM, it is chess this time. I'm assuming that it's a rivals in chess to lovers. Could it be any better? I'm actually really excited for this one. Number 5, you can't see my fingers, 5 is biggest disappointment for the year. I actually have 2 for this one, which makes me really upset because, as I said, I haven't read that many good books this year. Now, the first one is my own fault, really, and it's That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. I say it's my own fault because I did not know what I was getting myself into, and I thought that this was a cozy fantasy when in fact it is actually a demon smut book. Very different genres, but the content was just also not what I was after. It didn't really fit my groove, even if I was expecting it to be a demon romance. There are just some things that were a little bit inexcusable. I have a video where I read it. You can go watch that if you want to see my more in real time thoughts about it. But realistically, yeah, the content just wasn't really what I wanted and the overall story fell a bit flat. And I'm so sad because these covers are so aesthetically pleasing. This one, and then also the subsequent books that come after it. But the book just doesn't match. I'm sad. The second one, I really, again, can't tell you about it because it is Charm by Tracy Wolff. If I told you why I was disappointed, it would spoil so much of the series for you. So I will not do that, but I will instead tell you I was disappointed because this book is placed as book 5 in the series, but the events that occur actually happen in between books 1 and 2. So it felt like a very large step back in the story. We had to go back to the characters having much less knowledge and growth than what they do at the end of book 4, and it just felt a little bit out of place. But that's honestly not the biggest reason that it was a disappointment. I just can't tell you why, but just know that I was disappointed and I'm very sad about it. Number 6 is biggest surprise so far this year, and I promise you that this is the last time I'm going to mention the series, but it is Crave by Tracy Wolff. We're going to go with the whole series this time, but the first book particularly. I say it was a surprise because I had absolutely no expectations. I didn't even intend to read it. I just had nothing else to listen to while I was driving to work. I put it on to see what it was about because I was curious. I hadn't heard anything about it from my immediate channels in the book universe. I'd just seen it around and I didn't know what the story was about. I just put it on and I was so pleasantly surprised that I was disgustingly intrigued in the story and the characters and the romance. 120 hours later, we finished the series and I'm not mad about it. Okay, number 7 is newest favorite author. I don't really feel like I can accurately answer this question because I haven't read enough of any of the authors that I have read this year to say that they're a favorite. So, going off of first impressions only, I'm gonna say Brandon Sanderson. I don't know where I've left Skyward. I've lost the book, and I think I've lost Skyward as a book more times than I've lost any other book that I own. Regardless, I have Starsight. We can use this as a fill-in. I read Skyward, the first one in the series this year by Brandon Sanderson, and I'm saying that he's a new favorite author only because I think that I really enjoy his writing style. I feel like it's a difficult thing or a complex thing to write a fantasy or a sci-fi without it feeling clunky and info dumpy and like you're reading from a textbook. But he made it so that it was actually really quite easy to read and quite easy to get through. And I really enjoyed his character development and character writing. It's not without its faults and he is not without his faults, but on first impressions, I think that I am quite compatible with Brandon Sanderson's writing at this point. I've literally read 1 of his books. I own at least 5. I've read 1. I haven't even read this one yet. It's a part of the last question, so we'll get there in a second. Question 8 is newest fictional crush. I have found myself really enjoying dark fantasy romances more recently. But I would say that out of all of the characters and all of the new fictional men and women that I have read from, my newest fictional crush is probably our lovely broody dark cinnamon roll Kai Aldir from A Deadly Vow. I read this earlier in the year. It is a dark fantasy romance. It is kind of all of the tropes that you want and love in a book. The first half is a little bit info dumpy, but once you push through that, the story flows and it is so addictive. Can we look at this man? Look at him. Broody, bit of a cinnamon roll. the author did a very, very good job with this one. There is a literal "who did this to you?" which just made me weak at the knees. There is a thing that happens at the end of the book and I can't tell you, but it just makes his character so much better. So much better. So anyway, Cinnamon Roll Kai is my new fictional crush for the first half of this year. Number 9 is new favorite character. This was also a tough one, and I have leaned more towards the males this year. I don't know why, but I have. Wendell Bambleby from Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, purely for the fact that he reads just like Howl from Howl's Moving Castle. There were so many parallels, there were so many similarities. As much as I struggled to get through this book, I really enjoyed particularly the end part, where many things happen that just further my love for his character as well. I feel like this and the last question could probably like interchange with each other. They're both my new favorite characters and both of my new fictional crushes. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry. The book that made me sob like a baby earlier this year is none other than A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. I think this is the second hardest I have cried over a book in my lifetime. The first hardest was A Little Life, and that's just a whole nother story. But I'm genuinely surprised at how much I cried at the end of A Man Called Ove. Ove could also be my new favorite character. A Man Called Ove could also be my favorite book that I have read this year. But it is the only book that has made me sob this year, and thus it is perfectly slotted within this category alone. A Man Called Ove is a story that follows a curmudgeonly old man named Ove. It deals with many different themes like grief and loss and friendship and love in many different forms. It tells the tale of Ove both in present day, but then there's flashbacks to his past as well, and it's just beautiful. It was fantastic. I cannot give this book high enough praise, and I cried so much at the end. To balance that out was a book that made you happy. And I actually have 2 for this one, which was exciting. There was some positives this year. First was The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. This is a graphic novel. It is her newest graphic novel. I haven't read any of the other ones that she has yet, but they're on their way. They're in the mail. The Moth Keeper follows Anya. Anya has just taken up the role of Moth Keeper within her town, in her village, and this was just the most easy, heartwarming, aesthetically pleasing graphic novel that I have ever read. Also, it's about moths, and I love moths so much. Ask me anything about moths, please. I don't think you understand how excited I was at trivia this week when there was 2 questions about moths. It was fantastic. The second book for this one is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. And this one just made me happy because it was a cozy fantasy, and it actually was a cozy fantasy, and it was easy to read, there was low stakes, there was found family and witchy vibes, and they're just all of the things that I love in a book. So these 2 made me very happy, and I'm so pleased about that. Number 12 is the most beautiful book you have read this year. Now, technically, I haven't finished it yet, but it's definitely the most beautiful book that I have read this year, aesthetic-wise. It is Priory of the Orange Tree, but you'll have to tune into my next vlog that I have coming up to see why it is the most beautiful book that I have read this year. Or you could go to my Instagram because that's also where I posted it. Moving on. The last question number 13, is what books do I need to read by the end of the year? Boy howdy, there is a few. Do you remember that video I did where I said I was in the middle of like a stupid number of series? So like most of those, we want to rapid fire some of them. Skyward Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Also technically Breaking Dawn, if you want that, if you want to complete that series of videos that I did recently. But as a part of my goals, I also said this year that I wanted to start my Robin Hobb journey, so I have some of those to get to as well. And then also I'm just really hoping that I can actually finish Priory of the Orange Tree by the end of this year. Is it gonna happen? Who knows? It's so hard. It's so hard. I like it. I like it a lot. I enjoy the story, but it's just so taxing on my brain and I'm so tired. And then I guess also maybe like the other 80 books or so that I have on my physical TBR that I haven't read yet. And that is the mid-year freakout book tag for another year. This isn't all of the books. I wonder if I can actually hold all of the books at once. Let's find out. All right, this way? That way. That'll do. These are the books. That's the mid-year freakout book tag. Let me know if you do the tag as well, because I love watching these videos. I like validating my own emotions and feelings about books through other people experiencing the same thing that I do. So if you've done this, let me know. But thank you so much for watching. If you have made it this far, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a fantastic day or night or whatever time it is where you are in the world, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.